The first time the human commander laughed, the evacuation alarms were already screaming. Above the glass-ringed summit chamber of Orith Prime, 17 diplomatic fleets hung in perfect ceremonial formation, their hulls polished for history, their weapons sealed by treaty, their captains forbidden to raise shields unless the coalition itself declared war. Below them, 10,000 alien delegates stood beneath a crystal dome and watched the newest species in civilized space receive its first seat among the great powers. Humanity had arrived with open hands, quiet smiles, and no visible fear. Then the moon behind the sanctuary moved. It was not a moon. Every sensor in orbit died at once. The stars vanished behind a black geometric shadow so vast it made the fleets look like dust trapped against a window. The ancient warning systems buried beneath Orith Prime awakened for the first time in 9,000 years, and the sanctuary's central intelligence spoke in a voice stripped of ceremony. Extinction-class presence detected. Survival probability, 2.9%. The chamber froze. Admirals reached for sealed command bands. Priests began speaking final rites in 7 languages. The coalition's highest strategist collapsed into silence as tactical displays filled with impossible numbers. No one fired. No one moved. Protocol demanded verification, then consensus, then a defensive vote. Protocol, in that moment, became a death sentence written in perfect legal language. Commander Mara Vane, head of the Human Disaster Response Delegation, looked up at the impossible shadow swallowing the sky, and laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was worse than that. It was small, breathless, almost relieved, as if the universe had finally stopped pretending to be polite and said what it really wanted. Every alien in the chamber turned toward her. Security Chief Turin Vale felt his throat tighten, because he had studied human expressions for 3 sleepless nights, and this one was not joy. It was recognition. Ambassador Ilara Thorne did not ask Mara what was funny. She simply closed her eyes for 1 second, like someone hearing an old wound reopen, then said into the dead communication channel, "How long?" Mara checked the failing orbital display. 11 minutes before it reaches firing alignment. The coalition chancellor stared at her. "You know what that thing is?" Mara's smile faded, but her eyes did not lose their terrible calm. "No," she said. "But it knows us." Then every human in the chamber stopped smiling at the exact same time. The silence that followed her words did not feel like panic. Panic would have been easier to understand. Panic scattered thought, fractured decisions, and drove even disciplined minds into survival reflex. What settled over the chamber instead was something heavier, a suffocating stillness born from too many civilizations realizing at once that their greatest safeguards had never been designed for this. Above them, the black shape continued to unfold, not descending so much as revealing itself, like a structure stepping out of dimensions that had never agreed to share space. The sanctuary's outer fleets, bound by treaty and centuries of carefully negotiated restraint, held position as their targeting systems cycled through errors they had no language to describe. Nothing locked, nothing resolved. The enemy did not exist in any of the categories their weapons understood. Turin Vale felt the moment split into 2 realities. In one, the coalition would do what it had always done: consult, debate, wait for certainty. In the other, something else was already happening, something quieter and far more dangerous. The humans were moving, not rushing, not shouting. There was no dramatic call to action, no defiance shouted across the chamber. They simply broke formation with a kind of calm inevitability, as if the ceremony had been a prelude they had already accounted for. Commander Mara Vane stepped down from the diplomatic platform without waiting for permission. 2 members of her team peeled away toward the sanctuary's auxiliary control rings. Another approached the central systems console, not with the arrogance of a conqueror, but with the familiarity of someone returning to a machine she had seen before. "You will stand down," the coalition chancellor said, his voice finally finding strength as protocol reasserted itself. No species is authorized to interfere with sanctuary control during a first-rank threat declaration. Mara did not even look at him. "Then revoke the rule," she replied, already scanning the flickering interface. "That requires a full council vote." "Then we don't have time to pretend this is a council problem." The words were not hostile. They were worse than that, matter-of-fact, delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who had already accepted the consequences of being right too early. Turin watched the exchange unfold and felt the first crack form in the logic he had trusted his entire career. The humans were not panicking, and they were not ignoring the threat. They were behaving as though this moment had been rehearsed. Or remembered. "Commander," Turin said, stepping forward despite himself. "You implied recognition. Explain that." Mara's eyes flicked toward him, sharp and assessing, measuring not his rank but his usefulness. For a fraction of a second, something like hesitation crossed her expression. "Not doubt. Calculation. We've seen patterns like this," she said. "Not this scale, not this design, but the approach, the timing, the way it waits for you to organize before it moves. That part is familiar. To humans?" Turin pressed. "Or to your history?" Mara's mouth curved faintly again, but the humor was gone. "What's the difference?" Before he could answer, the sanctuary shuddered. Not from impact, but from interference. The crystal dome overhead rippled as if something immense had brushed against the edge of reality itself. The stars beyond distorted, bending into lines that converged toward the black structure. The Central Intelligence attempted to compensate, flooding the chamber with revised projections. "Correction," it intoned. "Extinction probability revised to 4.1%. "That is higher," one of the counselors whispered. "Yes," Turin said quietly, watching the humans. "But not by enough to matter." Mara tapped rapidly across the console, pulling up layers of data the sanctuary AI had not prioritized. Thermal shadows, gravitational echoes, signal noise hidden beneath the noise. She was not searching for confirmation. She was searching for intent. "What are you looking for?" Turin asked. "For the part where it stops pretending," she replied. Around them, the coalition began to fracture along familiar lines. Military delegates argued for immediate shield activation despite the treaty locks. Cultural envoys demanded restraint, insisting that no first contact had ever been resolved through aggression. Engineers called out contradictions in the sensor data, each interpretation clashing with the next. The sanctuary, designed to host peace, became a theater of hesitation. And still, the humans moved as one. Ambassador Thorne stepped into the center of the chamber, not to command, but to redirect. Her voice carried without amplification, cutting cleanly through the rising noise. "Listen to me," she said, and for reasons Turin could not yet explain, the room obeyed. "We are not your enemy," she continued, her gaze sweeping across species that had spent centuries learning to distrust new powers. "But whatever that is," she inclined her head toward the shadow beyond the dome. "It did not arrive by accident. It arrived on a schedule. And schedules mean expectations." "Expectations of what?" the Chancellor demanded. "Of how we respond." The words landed with a weight that shifted the conversation in an instant. This was no longer about survival probability alone. It was about behavior under pressure, about being observed. Turin felt the implication settle into place like a key turning in a lock he had not known existed. The timing of the anomaly during the ceremony, the synchronized human reaction, the lack of surprise. "This is a test," he said, the realization forming even as he spoke it. Mara did not confirm it. She did not deny it. She simply met his eyes for a moment, and that was answer enough. The sanctuary lights dimmed suddenly as power diverted to defensive systems that refused to fully activate. The AI's voice shifted, losing its measured cadence. "Unknown signal detected within core architecture. Source external. Intent indeterminate." "Not indeterminate," Mara murmured. "You just don't like the answer." "What answer?" Turin asked. She hesitated again, and this time he understood why. Saying it aloud would change everything. It would transform the threat from an anomaly into a message. But before she could speak, one of her engineers called out from the auxiliary ring. "Commander, we've got something. There's a pattern inside the interference. It's not random." "Of course it isn't," Mara said softly. "Show me." The projection that appeared above the console was not a weapon schematic or a tactical map. It was simpler than that, a repeating sequence of energy pulses, structured with a precision that felt almost deliberate, like language stripped of symbols, reduced to pure rhythm. Turin stared at it, his mind racing through possibilities. Communication, calibration, warning, or invitation. What does it mean? He asked. Mara's fingers hovered above the console, not touching, as if even interacting with the pattern required permission she was not yet ready to grant. It means, she said slowly, we're not being attacked. The chamber erupted at once, disbelief crashing into fragile hope. Then what is this? The Chancellor demanded. Mara finally pressed the command, isolating the signal, amplifying it until it filled the space above them like a heartbeat echoing through vacuum. It's waiting, she said. For what? She looked up at the impossible shadow consuming the sky, and for the first time since the alarms began, something like tension crept into her voice. For us to do something wrong. Turin felt the ground shift beneath that realization, not physically but conceptually. Every protocol the coalition relied on was built to prevent escalation, to avoid mistakes through caution and consensus. But if the thing above them was measuring failure, then hesitation itself might be the error it was waiting for. And the humans had already decided that waiting was not an option. Mara straightened, the faint echo of her earlier laughter returning, not as humor, but as resolve hardened by experience. All right, she said quietly, almost to herself. You've made your move. Then she turned back to the console, eyes burning with a focus that felt less like fear and more like recognition. Now it's our turn to answer. The moment Mara said it, the station changed. It was not visible at first, not something the untrained eye could track, but Turin felt it the way one feels pressure before a storm breaks. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if the sanctuary had stopped pretending to be a place of ceremony and revealed its true nature as something far older, far less forgiving. Systems that had remained passive for millennia began to awaken, not fully, not obediently, but in fragments. Subroutines flickering into existence and then vanishing again as if they were waiting for permission no one present had the authority to give. Above them, the black structure shifted again. This time it was unmistakable. Segments of its surface unfolded with impossible geometry, revealing internal layers that were not machinery in any recognizable sense, but organized complexity on a scale that defied comprehension. Light did not reflect from it properly. It bent, slowed, fragmented, as though the object itself dictated how reality behaved in its presence. The fleets in orbit attempted to reposition, but their navigation systems fed them contradictory vectors, and several ships spun gently out of formation, drifting like leaves caught in a current they could not see. The sanctuary AI spoke again, and for the first time it sounded afraid. Core architecture override in progress. Source, internal. Turin turned sharply. Internal? That's not possible. It is now, Mara said. She was no longer just reading the system. She was inside it. Her hands moved across the console with a precision that was almost surgical, bypassing layers of control the coalition had spent centuries refining. She did not break the system. She slipped through it, using pathways so old they had never been rewritten because no one had remembered they existed. Turin watched her access logs that predated the sanctuary itself, and a realization began to form, slow and cold. This place had not been built for diplomacy. It had been repurposed for it. Commander, Turin said carefully, what exactly are you interfacing with? Mara did not look up. The part of your sanctuary that was never meant for you. That answer should have triggered immediate intervention. Security protocols demanded it. The Chancellor even began, issuing the order, his voice rising in authority. But before it could be completed, the projection above the chamber changed again. The signal, the repeating pulse they had isolated, shifted frequency. Not randomly, in response. Every conversation in the room died at once as the pattern adapted, aligning itself not with the sanctuary's systems, but with the humans' interference. The implication was immediate and terrifying. It was listening. No, it was learning. Turin felt something inside him recoil from that truth, because it meant the situation had already crossed a boundary no protocol had ever accounted for. This was not a passive test. It was interactive, and the humans had just made the first move. "What did you do?" he asked. Mara's voice was quiet now, stripped of anything unnecessary. "I answered it." "With what?" She finally looked at him, and for a moment, the calm cracked just enough to reveal the weight beneath it. "With the only thing it understands." Before he could demand clarification, the sanctuary convulsed. Not from impact, from rejection. Entire sections of the station went dark as power was rerouted away from systems that had suddenly become incompatible. The crystalline dome above fractured into layered projections, overlapping realities that did not agree on where the boundaries of space should be. Delegates stumbled as gravity fluctuated in localized pockets, and somewhere deep within the structure, something massive began to move. The AI's voice broke into static. "Error. Behavioral deviation detected. Species response outside expected parameters. Recalibrating. Recalibrating." Mara exhaled slowly. There it is. Turin's mind raced, trying to keep pace with a situation that was no longer following any recognizable logic. "You said this was a test. Tests have parameters. They have goals. What does it want?" Mara's gaze lifted toward the impossible structure beyond the dome. "It wants us to fail," she said. "That's not a goal. That's a result." Exactly. The words hit harder than anything else she had said so far, because they stripped away the last illusion of fairness. This was not a test designed to measure worth. It was a filter designed to confirm unworthiness. The coalition had already lost. They just hadn't realized it yet. Around them, the chamber descended into controlled chaos. Military representatives demanded authorization to break treaty locks. Engineers argued over whether the sanctuary could even survive another systems shift. Cultural envoys tried, desperately, to maintain some semblance of order, as if language alone could stabilize a reality that had begun to fracture. And through it all, the humans did not slow down. One of Mara's engineers, young, sharp-eyed, hands moving faster than Turin could track, projected a new layer of data into the air. Not just the signal this time, but the structure behind it. Hidden beneath the sanctuary's architecture, buried so deep it had never appeared in any official record, was another system. Not built, embedded. Ancient code wrapped around the core of the station like a second skeleton. One that had been waiting patiently for the right conditions to activate. Its purpose was not diplomacy. It was evaluation. "Your sanctuary," the engineer said, voice tight with disbelief, "isn't a meeting place. It's a checkpoint." Turin felt the words settle into him with the weight of inevitability. Every anomaly, every inconsistency in the station's design, every unexplained redundancy, they all pointed here. "We weren't invited," he said slowly. Mara shook her head. "No," she replied. "You were assembled." The distinction was devastating. Before Turin could process it fully, the projection shifted again, this time forming something unmistakable. Not just a pattern, not just a signal, a choice. Two paths appeared in the data stream, branching outcomes represented in cold, precise energy states. One stabilized the sanctuary at the cost of isolating a significant portion of the station. Entire sections sealed, life support cut, thousands of delegates sacrificed to preserve the rest. The other path kept everyone alive, for now, but led to total systemic collapse within minutes. The room went silent again, but this time it was not shock that held them. It was recognition. Every species present understood the scenario instantly. It was the oldest dilemma in existence, stripped of emotion and presented as pure calculation. Sacrifice the few to save the many, or refuse and lose everything. The sanctuary AI confirmed it, its voice stabilizing just enough to deliver the verdict. Optimal survival pathway identified. Recommend immediate compartmentalization of lower sectors. Casualty projection, 32%. 32%. Turin's stomach tightened. He could already hear the arguments forming, the justifications, the careful language that would turn necessity into something palatable. This was how civilizations survived. This was how they endured. This was how they proved they were rational. He looked at Mara. She was already shaking her head. "No," she said. The Chancellor stared at her in disbelief. "You don't get to refuse reality, Commander. This is not your decision." Mara met his gaze without flinching. "You're right," she said. "It's not." "Then stand aside." "No." The word landed like a fracture line. Turin felt something shift again, deeper this time, not in the station, but in the people inside it. The coalition had spent centuries building systems to make impossible decisions manageable, to turn moral weight into process, to ensure that when the moment came, no one had to carry the burden alone. And now a single human was rejecting all of it. "Do you understand what you're saying?" the Chancellor demanded. "If we don't act, everyone dies." Mara's expression did not change, but something in her voice did. It hardened, sharpened into something that carried more than just defiance. "Yes," she said quietly. "We've been here before." Turin felt the words hit him like a physical force. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. "You've faced this?" he asked. Mara's gaze flicked to him, and for the first time since the alarms began, there was no humor, no calm distance, just truth. "Not this exact scenario," she said, "but the same choice." "What did you do?" She held his eyes for a fraction longer than necessary, and in that moment, Turin understood something he had not been ready to accept until now. The laughter, the recognition, the certainty. Humanity had not just studied this kind of situation. Parameters, conflict, evaluation criteria, unstable. "Good," Mara whispered. Her engineers moved in sync now, linking systems that had never been meant to connect. Life support grids, shield matrices, emergency corridors, power relays. Everything the station had compartmentalized to isolate failure was being forced into a single, unified network. "What are you doing?" the Chancellor demanded. "Removing the choice," Mara replied. "That will collapse the entire station." "Yes." The word hit like a physical impact. Turin felt his breath catch, the implications crashing into him all at once. By linking every system, by eliminating the isolation protocols, Mara was doing the one thing the test could not account for. She was making it impossible to sacrifice anyone, which also meant they had survived it. "We chose wrong," Mara said. The chamber seemed to tilt around him. "And now," Turin whispered. Mara turned back to the console, her hands already moving, already rewriting a system that had been designed to trap them. "Now," she said, her voice steady with a conviction that felt less like hope and more like inevitability. "We don't make that mistake again." Above them, the black structure pulsed once, as if acknowledging the answer. And for the first time since it had appeared, it began to change. The moment the structure responded, everything accelerated. The black mass above Orith Prime did not descend, did not fire, did not unleash the kind of annihilation every species had already begun preparing for. Instead, it unfolded inward, compressing its impossible geometry into something sharper, more focused, like a lens narrowing onto a single point of interest. Onto them. The sanctuary trembled under the weight of that attention. Systems that had resisted activation now surged into full function, not because the coalition had authorized it, but because the ancient architecture embedded within the station had made its own decision. Every display across the chamber shifted from probability to execution. Final evaluation phase initiated. The AI no longer sounded like itself. The voice had changed, flattened, stripped of personality until it became something colder, older, and far more certain. Present solution. The two paths still hovered in the air, glowing with quiet inevitability. Sacrifice, or extinction. The chamber held its breath. Turin felt it in every delegate around him, the slow collapse into logic that had preserved civilizations for millennia. 32% to save the rest. The numbers were clean, efficient, defensible, the kind of decision that could be justified in history records and memorialized with solemn dignity. It would work, and that was exactly why it was wrong. He looked at Mara again, expecting resistance, defiance, anything that matched the weight of what she was rejecting. What he saw instead was something far more dangerous. Clarity. She wasn't arguing anymore. She had already decided. "Commander," one of her engineers said, voice tight with urgency, "we don't have time. The system is locking in the sacrifice pathway." "I know," Mara replied. "Then what are we doing?" Mara exhaled slowly, the faint echo of that first laugh still buried somewhere beneath her calm. "We're breaking the test." The words hit the room like a fracture through certainty. Several delegates reacted instantly, protesting, demanding explanation, invoking laws and systems and everything that had ever made their survival possible. "You can't break it," the Chancellor snapped. "It's built into the station's core." Mara finally turned to face him fully, and for the first time, there was no attempt to soften what she was about to say. "It's built on an assumption," she said, "that you'll choose between two options it gives you. That's not an assumption. That's reality." "No," Mara replied quietly. "That's a trap." Turin felt the shift before he understood it. The entire framework of the situation, the forced choice, the clean division of outcomes, it all depended on one thing: acceptance. Acceptance that the system defined the limits. Humanity had never been particularly good at accepting limits. "What's the third option?" Turin asked, his voice cutting through the rising noise. Mara's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time since the crisis began, there was something like approval there. "Good," she said. "You're starting to think like us." She turned back to the console, her hands moving faster now, not navigating the system but rewriting its priorities in real time. The ancient code resisted at first, rejecting inputs that did not conform to its structure. But Mara did not force it. She reframed it. "You built a system to test survival," she said, her voice steady as if she were speaking directly to the intelligence behind the structure. "Not just survival of individuals. Survival of civilizations." The chamber fell silent again, not because they understood, but because something in her tone demanded attention. "Your test assumes that rational species will choose efficiency," she continued, "that they'll sacrifice the few to preserve the many, that they'll prove their worth by making the hard decision." The projection flickered, the two paths pulsing in response. "That's not survival," Mara said. "That's optimization." The distinction landed like a spark. Turin felt it ignite something he hadn't realized was there, a realization forming just beyond the edge of comprehension. Survival was not just about numbers, not just about outcomes. It was about what a civilization became in the process. "You're measuring the wrong thing," Mara finished. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the structure above the station pulsed again, harder this time, the light bending around it in ways that made the eye ache to follow. The sanctuary AI stuttered, its voice fragmenting as if two systems were trying to speak through the same channel. "If it fails," Turin said slowly, "everyone dies together." Mara met his gaze, and there was no hesitation left in her. "Yes. Then how is that better?" "It isn't," she said. "It's honest." The chamber erupted again, fear breaking through the fragile control they had maintained. This was no longer a calculated risk. It was a leap into uncertainty with no guarantee of survival. But as Turin looked around, he saw something else beginning to spread, slower than panic, but stronger. Choice. Not the one the system had given them. Their own. One by one, delegates began to act. Not through votes or protocols, but through instinct. Engineers stepped forward to assist the human team, overriding their own safeguards. Military officers redirected power from weapons into stabilization systems. Cultural envoys coordinated evacuation routes that no longer prioritized species or rank, but proximity and need. For the first time since the crisis began, the coalition was not reacting. It was deciding, together. The structure above them pulsed again, faster now, its geometry shifting as if trying to resolve a problem it had never encountered before. The evaluation system strained against the new parameters, searching for a solution that no longer existed within its framework. "Evaluation failure," the AI stuttered. No optimal pathway. No optimal pathway. Mara's hands slowed as the system reached its breaking point. Come on, she murmured. Think. The station shuddered violently, energy surging through the newly unified network. For one terrifying moment, it felt like everything would collapse, that the gamble had failed, that the universe had simply proven itself right. Then, stability. Not perfect, not clean, but real. The projection flickered, the two paths dissolving into static before vanishing entirely. The ancient system hesitated, its logic unraveling in the face of a response it could not categorize. Species classification, anomalous, it intoned. Above them, the black structure began to withdraw. Not in defeat, in recognition. Evaluation complete. The voice that spoke those words was no longer the sanctuary AI. It was deeper, resonant with a presence that felt vast and distant, like something that had been watching civilizations rise and fall long before any of them had learned to speak. Result: survival through non-optimal cooperation. The phrase hung in the air, strange and almost disapproving. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, accepted, the pressure lifted. Not gradually, all at once. The structure collapsed inward, folding back into the void it had emerged from, the stars snapping back into place, as if reality itself had been holding its breath. The sanctuary system stabilized, lights returning, gravity settling, the artificial calm of Orith Prime reasserting itself over a chamber that would never feel the same again. For a long moment no one spoke. Turin stood where he was, the weight of what had just happened settling into something he knew would take years to fully understand. He looked at Mara, expecting triumph, relief, something to match the scale of what they had achieved. She just exhaled. You did it, he said. Mara shook her head. No, she replied. We did. The distinction mattered. Around them, the coalition began to move again, not with the rigid structure of protocol, but with something more fluid, more uncertain, and far more real. They had survived, not because they had followed the rules that had defined them, but because they had chosen to step outside them. Turin felt something shift inside himself, the same way it had when he first realized the humans weren't reacting to the threat. They had been ready for it. Not this exact scenario, not this exact test, but the idea of it. The possibility that survival might require more than logic, more than efficiency, more than fear. He turned to Mara one last time, a question forming that he already suspected he understood the answer to. When you laughed, he said, what did you recognize? Mara's expression softened, just slightly. The moment the universe stopped asking if we could survive, she said, and started asking how. Turin nodded slowly, the weight of that settling into something that felt less like fear and more like clarity. High above them, beyond the reach of any sensor, something ancient recorded the result. And somewhere far beyond that, unseen and unanswered, another system awakened, waiting for the next time humanity would be asked to choose.